Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed true that I represent ICRAF in Brussels, and it is indeed true that agroforestry is my passion. But Christian did me a disservice by describing my work as being limited to tropical agroforestry. It doesn't matter where the trees grow. If they need my voice, I will give it to them. And so you will, those of you who have seen some of the presentations I've made in Brussels will know that I have freely borrowed all of your work and all of your wonderful slides to make the case to policymakers that these are the technologies of the future and that it's time they got a little bit more support. Wow. Look at this. A mere 5 years ago, in December, when it's grey and rainy and sleety, and you can't go outside, a bunch of people sat around a desk and said, well, why don't we found ICRAF? And they did. And a mere 5 years later, here we are. And I think, Christian, I'm not mistaken if I say that you had about twice as many delegates as you expected, making some problems with the catering and the transport, but it all worked out. But it also says down there that we're celebrating 20 years of innovation in European agroforestry. So I was a bit puzzled, and in the end I solved this conundrum with my own family. Let me present to you on the left my daughter Emily, 20 years old, and, on the right my daughter Emily, 20 years old, and on the left my daughter Leontine, 5 years old. They get on extremely well despite the vast difference in age, and I suppose that European agroforestry must therefore be slightly similar. Now, ICRAF is even larger than we've been led to expect. On the left is a chart that I have freely borrowed from Rosa's slides, which you will see later. But I've noticed that in this room, over the days, we've had delegates from North America, and we've had a big pool of delegates from the province of Henan in China. When I heard that this province, the little red dot on the map over there, had 107 million people living in it, I was flabbergasted. When I heard and I saw the pictures of these vast agroforestry systems that I have down there, I was heartened. And guess what? These are pictures I am going to carry on using. We also know that in addition to ICRAF and the North American Federation, there is a global occasion that happens sometimes, the World Congress on Agroforestry. And Christian and the French, I'm very happy to be able to report from my own hierarchy that the desire that you have expressed to have the World Congress here in Montpellier in 2019 is enthusiastically received, because we had the first one in Florida, the second one in Nairobi, and the third one in Delhi, and it's about time it came back to the old world. Now, agroforestry, why is it that we get out of bed in the morning? And there are many, many pictures out there, and this is one I took yesterday on our field trip. No prizes for guessing which side of this particular fence our heart is on. But look at the complexity on the left, and then the simplicity on the right, on the almost desert-like conditions on the right, and the complexity on the left. Now, anybody walking through that would notice it, but we're scientists, so we have to count things. And so Fabien Liagre counted woodlice in both of these systems. And on the left, Fabien, correct me if I'm wrong, you counted about 37,000 woodlice per square meters in that system. And that's just a proxy for all the other arthropods and microbial life and worms, etc., that you're going to be finding in there. But Fabien also counted on the other side of the fence. Any guesses? How many woodlice over there? More than 0 and more than 3. Any other guesses? I have 5. Any other guesses? Ah, that's too high already. There's only 8 that were counted per square meter. Now, that being the case, I'd like you to explain to me the following conundrum, which we've been dealing with over the last 3 days, which is that for every euro of research which is spent on these complex systems, and I'm not just talking agroforestry, I'm talking any and all forms of agroecology, there must be about 100 euros which are spent on research and development on these desert-like systems on the right. The guys who do the chemistry, the guys who do the mechanics, the guys who do the genetics, the guys who have a little black box which is only 25,000 euros and which will guarantee that your tractor will squirt exactly the right amount of nitrogen on every square centimeters of your 10,000 hectare farm, these guys are spending the research money and they're getting the research money. We are not. And changing that is what we are about, because that's really simple. I have no idea what they're spending another 100 euros of research on something like that. But that's really complicated. And as we know from the visits we've made and from the work that we've done, that complexity is encouraging and it's intimidating, because it's really, really hard to come up with a set of tried and tested recipes that you can give to farmers who just want to get on with their farming life. An agroforester's answer to the question, what should I do, is always a variation on the following. Well, it depends. And while that is the right answer, it's not always the helpful answer. Now, that little bit of research money we've done has allowed us to get some real basic stuff done. The land equivalency ratio, that's still as revolutionary today as when it was first discovered decades ago. When you show that to policymakers, when you show that to parliamentarians, when you show that to people who are connected to the world of agriculture, you literally see the light going on in their eyes. They get it. They understand it. They see that this simple model where you replace one species, the wheat on the left, with, where you add one species, the trees, to the wheat, and you have a two-species system, already exploits the available resources, in this case light, so much more efficiently. But most of that research has been done on systems which, let's face it, are relatively simple, like this one, which is, I believe, Vézénobre as it was before the trees were mature and harvested. But in the real world, farmers are already moving ahead. Any guesses as to what that is? Nope. It's an industrial oil palm plantation. It's an industrial agroforestry oil palm plantation in Brazil. If you look carefully, you can see the oil palm in the middle of the coffee, the fertilizer trees, the achai, the bananas, and everything else that's going on in there. These guys are generating about 50% more oil per hectare than their monocrop compatriots, and on top of that, they're generating income from these various other tree products. How much studying has been done on that compared to the monocrop systems? A fraction, a tiny fraction, and the complexity is so much higher. In Europe, we have the same thing. This is a slide I freely borrowed from our Dutch friends who gave that presentation this morning. It was great, so I immediately went to see them and said, can I borrow your presentation? And I got it. And this is what too many landscapes look like in Europe. They said, Spain looks like this. Well, I can happily take you to bits of northern France, or indeed bits of Belgium, or indeed bits of Germany that look just the same. A denuded landscape on its way to desertification, on which stuff is grown using industrial methods in which there are no trees. But even there, we see farmers here who are innovating and becoming more complex. Guess where I took this one from? Thank you, Mark Shepard, if you're somewhere in that room. These are the kind of complexities that farmers are experimenting in and that we as agroforesters need to document and that we spend the last 3 days telling each other about. These farmers have plans, and they have plans that are going to be working commercially, like this large system that we heard on this morning. And we are looking at them. But because we are scientists, perhaps what we do is look at it from a perspective which is still a little bit too detailed, looking at perspectives which are perhaps too narrow in the context of that great deal of complexity. And I think that will really be the challenge for agroforestry moving forward, is to figure out research protocols so that we can actually master and model that complexity and come to conclusions which are actionable and which are which give great impression that reflect that kind of complexity. Some people get it. This is the expression that Stéphane Le Foll wears when his fellow European ministers tell him, "You bloody hippie, we don't need agroforestry." And the difficulty is that even though he is the representative of the biggest agricultural power in Europe, when these guys and girls meet, he's only one in a crowd. Another thing that we discussed here, and another thing that we have to take on board, is not just how to do the science better, but how to do the promotion better. How do we help our friend in there convince the other 27 that he's not a hippie, but that he's onto something which is really, really important? How do we help them change their understanding? We look at this and we see a desert in the making. They see a productive field. Now, I was telling you that these guys, when they see this kind of landscape, look at a field, whereas we see an incipient desert. And when they look at this, they see a mess, whereas we see a high productivity farming system that has been nourishing people at high population densities for millennia. So how do we change their perception of what these things are? How do we change this? Why is it that the investment in conventional agriculture so dwarfs the investment in agroecology? And by the way, I hate that word, conventional agriculture. There is nothing conventional about it at all. It's something that was developed in the last 70 or 80 years and that has managed to colonize our minds so much that we even give it words that are worthy of tradition. Conventional, my foot. The obvious reason for that is that agribusiness has great cash flow. If I convince you, as I easily can, to buy my seeds and the machines that go with it and the chemicals that go with it and the fertilizers that go with it, I have hooked you as if you were taking heroin. Because every year you have to come back to me and buy more stuff. I'm not independent. You've become my slave. Whereas if I teach you how to do agroforestry, I help you design your system, I teach you how to prune, I get you started, and you can do it largely on your own. There is no way I'm making money. And that's why this room is filled with academics and a few farmers, and there's no consultants over here, there's no marketing people, whereas the Syngentas and the Monsantos and the Bayers of this world have thousands of people. They can afford to pay thousands of people to worry about answering one simple question: how can I get my stuff inside the mind of the farmer? They have those resources. They have a marketing budget. We don't. They have a research budget. We don't. They have political influence. We don't. So when you take that situation as a background, how do we get our knowledge not just into the heads of the Stéphane Le Folls of this world, but into the heads of the Barack Obamas? Because that's where this knowledge has to go. Because it's when the people at the top say, we need to change, that the enormous bureaucratic machinery of government begins to steer down below in the trenches. If you only deal with the people in the trenches, you are going to affect little bits, but you're not going to get the systemic change that we need to get our research funded, to get the landscapes transformed, and to help this planet cope with the changes that anthropogenic activities are giving to it. Now, if you want to do that, you need to generate a buzz. And there's a simple formula for generating a buzz. I have a confession to make. I'm a molecular geneticist and now I'm dealing with landscapes. But I was a troubled youth. And so for a few years I got lost and I worked in an advertising agency. And this is what we lived by. When the client had no money, we better made sure we had lots of creativity and there was huge emotional content in what we did. And yet, there's not a lot of emotional content in what we produce. There's huge amounts of creativity in the systems, but there's very little creativity in the way we talk about it and in the way we present about it. Now, you can also generate buzz in a specifically French way. I'm told it works in France, but I'm not sure it will work in the rest of the ICRAF countries. Or alternatively, you can find ways of encouraging farmers. This picture was taken last summer at the breakfast table of my holiday hotel in Hungary, where I was sharing a blessedly child-free holiday with my wife. Imagine my surprise when I noticed what was engraved on this beautiful vase. First prize, awarded for the best crop of roots grown with Balding's manures, 1915. This coffee jug, which the antique-loving owners of this Hungarian hotel had found during a trip somewhere and turned into a vase, was given a century ago to reward an exceptional farmer for using the resources available in his day, which were fully organic resources, most effectively. Those reward mechanisms, they still operate today, although I'm sure you would agree with me that in terms of taste, we have lost quite a lot over the last century. Perhaps we need to start thinking about those as well. Now, we know that this is important, and from my perspective, because after being in the advertising agency, I got involved in geopolitics a little bit. I invite those of you who are interested to Google Patrick Worm's Georgia to find out what exactly I did in 2008 when the Russians invaded Georgia. And so I'm particularly interested in those issues of security, land degradation, and making a living from the landscape. Other people are too. And there's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful conference happening at the end of this month in Caux, high above Montreux in Switzerland, in a hotel which reminded me the first time I saw it of the film The Grand Budapest Hotel, with wonderful hiking, wonderful views, and most importantly, wonderful companions to have interesting conversations with. But I'm here to close the Congress, not to advertise my family or my hobbies. And no Congress can be closed unless it looks to the future. And the future of ICRAF, of course, is 2018. Where will we go? We've had Brussels, we've had Cottbus, we've had Montpellier. I think there's going to be debates for years to come about whether the food was better in Montpellier or in Brussels. Is there a place out there that can beat it? Are any of you inspired to host the Congress in 2 years' time? I'm sure that Rosa, who will be speaking to you at the ICRAF General Assembly this afternoon, later this afternoon, will be absolutely delighted to do that. Now, soon we are going to talk about the ICRAF Awards. But I have another confession to make. It is my firm belief that no scientific congress is ever complete without a little spot of striptease. Allow me to get rid of my dad.